Good morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku Cheese TV, and I'm sorry for the delay of my Wi-Fi. I'm going to have to figure this out, but we're having a lot of Wi-Fi issues, so there's a bit of a delay. But I'm going to go ahead and begin my monologue. We welcome you to Pod and Roku TV's World Edition, and we greet you from wherever you are in the United States of America, around the world, on this wonderful show, where today we're going to wrap up the week talking about global affairs and increasingly turbulent world politically and economically. And we're excited in North Carolina as the President of the United States is visiting us in Durham on Tuesday to talk about the CHIPS Act. He's visiting Wolfspeed, and he's going to be talking about growing manufacturing jobs, particularly semiconductor jobs in the United States of America. We're going to be talking about the CHIPS Act on Monday. Going to be bringing in some guests maybe this week and next week to talk about that. And the second thing is that there's been a lot of developments on the Trump case. We're waiting to see whether the president will be formally indicted. North Korea tested a radioactive tsunami weapon at sea. That's a little bit scary. Triggered a tsunami. The GOP is pushing for a parents' rights bill in a clash over what's taught in schools. Protests continue in France over what President Macron is saying is a common sense move. And the United States, has launched airstrikes in Syria after a drone kills a U.S. worker. Those are some of the headlines of the day. And of course, some of the conversation will be focused in on the politics in America, the politics around the world, and what I would say is the word I've always used to describe the economy in the world with rising gas prices, inflation, a recession, is turbulence. And more, we are really feeling turbulence. Turbulence in U.S. foreign policy, turbulence around the world with countries like China and Iran, North Korea increasing their nuclear strength, and our adversaries in the U.S. working closer together, which should have many of us concerned about a potential for a World War III. And I would actually say that we're closer to a World War III than we were 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And we're also going to be talking about Ukraine and the war in Russia and where that fits into it. So, Mark, let's get started. I'm only here for a few minutes today, but to bring in our guests. I've set the table in terms of what you guys could talk about today, and I'll be here till 10:30. So please.
No doubt. I'm glad you're here. I don't know that the president knows what he's stepping into by stepping into Durham, and I'm interested to see what Lee Newton Rhodes has to say about what I'm going to mention. But there is some fireworks going on here in Durham, North Carolina, because one of our sitting council people, actually one that was recently appointed and all along those lines, is actually potentially going to be censured because there is some conversation around our latest city council member having some developers, because we do know that real estate development around the country and around the world is very important. But apparently she made some promises that if a certain real estate developer backed her campaign, she would definitely vote for their project to be approved and all along those lines. So there was some definite fireworks in our city hall last night.
What's her name?
That's Monique Hyman Hoseley or something along those lines. She's the latest member of the city council, and there was also some accusations about her hiring city staff to actually work on her campaign. So Lee, and then I'm gonna bring in Sasha because we're definitely gonna
How did that come out? How did that come out? Was that through social media or an email that was found in public record request that they were able to?
That was actually from their actual city council meeting. It was reported actively on the news media last night. So it was actually.
Well, how did they find out about her conversation with the developer before you bring in the other guests?
My guess is that there was some people within well, actually, I think the developer came back to the city hall and made a formal complaint. So I think the developer came back and was like, wait a minute, is this ethically correct and all in that space? So it could have been some political tit-a-tat going on, because there was some conversation about whether some other members of the city council don't have some can they really throw a rock, because if the rock is thrown back, it could also hit them as well. It's kind of like that old analogy, and I'm not using it correctly, about the glass house, that if you throw a rock from a glass house, that they might throw it back. And of course, that means that the house could get broken on your end as well. That's why I was going to ask Lee.
Well, I think one thing, well, anyway, go ahead and bring the guest. I mean, and those of you know, I think Lee might have just joined the show, but when my last campaign, I got really knocked for taking contributions from developers. It wasn't for voting for any specific project, but the whole experience, I no longer take money from developers as long as I'm a city official. But one of the things, I think there should be a law or ordinances passed that would not allow council members to accept money from developers. I think this would actually be a good thing, because then it would actually help both the parties not be put in this situation. Now, a council member that says, if it's trade, you do this and I will do that, that's very damaging. If they found that on record, of course, this has to be documented, but if they were, let's also not forget that texts are public record as well, right? Along with emails. So they can do an email request now.
And one of the things that I thought that Elaine O'Neill, who is our mayor, did that was probably a good move on her part, is that there are outside forces that will be doing the investigation. So it's my understanding that the State Bureau of Investigations has been brought in to actually investigate. So it won't be just the local folks investigating. It will be an outside force that is investigating how much of that is reality and how much of that is campaign politics.
I wonder if she'll run again.
Well, hold on a second, Lee. Okay. She was appointed when a sitting city council person moved out of country, because actually Charlie Reese, who I know, moved out of country, and she was appointed for that position. And yes, she had actually formally announced her campaign, I want to say, at one of the cultural arts centers that I work at within the last 2 weeks or so, within the last week or two. So yes, she is planning to run. Now, whether she backs off of that run because of these, that will be an interesting thing to say. Lee, what was your quick
just a comment for Steve, but for you also, Mark. Steve, you can make whatever rules, regulations, or laws you want to make. If you're dealing with dishonest people, they'll find a way around it. Yeah, that's the problem. It's not the laws that are not adequate. It's the people we're putting in positions of power who are corrupt criminals. They will find a way around it, whether it's campaign financing, whether it's nepotism, whether it's quid pro quo. All those laws are irrelevant to people who are on. You and I, we don't need laws in the books for murder. We're not going to do it, okay? But people who are going to murder, they don't care about the laws. Bank robbery, fill in the blank. Laws are irrelevant pretty much. Very few people, do laws make a difference? You either have these morals or you don't. Am I wrong? Do you disagree?
I agree with you. All I'm saying is that it
makes people feel good, but it's all show.
Well, but what I'm saying is that, okay, here's what I'm saying. I agree with you, but what I'm saying is that if you made it a law that you couldn't accept money from developers, then developers wouldn't be sending money to city council members. And let's be honest here, okay? Why would a developer give money to a council member? Because if they give money to a council member, they put that council member in a position where they feel like I have to vote some way or another way, right? It's
not the giving of the money that's the problem.
Now, in my case, I did not know the developer sent me money. And I actually had not seen the online contribution. But because I'm an ethical person, to be very honest with you, I didn't have to report that until later in the quarter after my election was over. But I didn't feel right that the people that I needed to be honest and say, I did accept this money through my portal, but I'm giving the check back. And I actually cast the check and returned it to the developer, which I think, and I took a proactive action rather than, saying, oh, whatever. But they gave me $4,000.
No, I said, so you're making another point, maybe all contributions should be blind. Because if developers wanted to support a certain candidate, let them do it. But why should the candidate have any knowledge of that? Because once they have knowledge of that, it's going to blind them and corrupt their views of what they're going to vote for.
Well, I want Dan Worthington in this, and we're going to
Yeah, I
get
want
some
to
of
hear
these.
Dan's
But the
Worthington,
reason is you have to disclose who it comes from. There's no anonymous donors. The finance laws require every dollar that you get. If Dan Worthington,
No, I get that.
if Dan Worthington donated $5 to me, or $10 to me, or $100 to me, we'd have to say, who is he? He was a retired professor, law professor. He does, where does
Are you
he
sure
live?
there's no threshold? I was in the impression there's $1 threshold that you can give anonymously.
I think there is a threshold,
No,
Dan.
there's no threshold. If he gave me in North Carolina, if he gave me 50 cents, I would have to report it.
Oh, but is there a threshold going the other way? Because I thought there was a threshold of the maximum amount that you can donate, and that's what. But I could be wrong. And all
Yeah,
that,
there's a
Dan, you're going to
maximum of
love this, and we'll
$5,000.
bring in Sasha because we definitely got to get to world issues as well. But there was a very diligent and very active conversation at one point after the work session, because it was a work session, because apparently, like I said, the young lady is a young lady, and well, actually she's not that young, she's only a few years younger than I am and everything, but she did there was a conversation between the two city council people, and of course you do know gender came up because there was a whole argument between two of the city council members where they were feeling that if it was a man that was going through this, it would not have been given the same kind of treatment. So there was a very active, I want to say they said it was a 4-minute conversation between one of the other female city council members and the mayor pro tem, who is definitely an African American male, but they were trying to bring up the gender issue as well. So I don't know whether you think that that's even a fair assessment of things when people try to bring up gender.
I don't know what the issue was.
No, well, the issue was possibly money that was not fair to be given because it could influence an election. Because we do know that a lot of times lobbyists will try to influence an election, whether it's the lobbyists from the drug societies, or not drug societies, but the drug companies, or whether it's a lobbyist from the business community. I mean, we even saw that to some degree with some of the things that Trump has been accused of, because there have definitely been some things around construction and construction bids, even in those situations, from my understanding. But you can correct me if I'm wrong, Lee, but I do think that I remember hearing some stuff about some things even on his camp as well.
Yeah, I'm just finding a $200 threshold, Steve. Maybe I'm wrong. That under $200, you can do it anonymously. Over 200, it has to be said, who's giving it.
Is that federally or is that
federally? I believe.
I'd have to double check. All I know is that if $200 showed up in your account and it wasn't accounted for, you're going to be audited by the state board of elections.
Well, there might be state versus federal. Okay. If you're
a state requirement. Yeah, he's got a state requirement. That's different. And federal elections are a little bit different. They're federally governed.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. Hey,
Sasha, go ahead and
lead
lead the show. I'm going to be here, but let's get into the other issue.
That's what I was going to get to Ukraine.
Let's get a quick update from Sasha on Ukraine. But then there was recently an attack on U.S. attack on Syria, so we want to talk about that. But let's start with Ukraine.
Okay. So number one, what I'm looking in the morning when I get up, how many Russians were killed yesterday? Well, that number now again over 1,000, exactly 1,020 Russians were killed. You see, the objective of any army in order to be victorious is to kill as many enemy people as possible. So if you kill 1,000 people a day, and 365 times 1,000, I think it's going to be 365,000 in 1 year. Okay, that's a fair number. And what I'd like to mention is that total so far killed is 169,170. So another 1,000, and we are over 170,000 Russians, people, soldiers killed. Remember, soldiers, because Russians, unlike Ukrainians, they're killing all soldiers, women, children, innocent people, civilians, just whoever is there, children. So this is where we are as the war is concerned. Now, as a peace or possible peace, in order to save lives on both sides. Look, if Russia will get, let's see, if Russia will stop fighting, really what's going to happen? The war is over. If Ukraine will stop fighting, Ukraine is over. Okay, that's a fundamental difference between both sides, that Ukraine is fighting for its independence, for right to exist, and Russia is fighting war similar to Hitler's war or any other the most horrible wars in history. Actually, it's becoming now the most horrible war in history as we speak. So there is no possible for any peace or even negotiating peace. And the visit of Emperor Xi proved exactly that, because as I said before, he offered Putin two scenarios. One is bad and one is very bad. And in a very bad scenario, he will lose his power. He will be completely distracted, probably by his own people. And in a not so bad scenario, he would guarantee Putin his staying in power, in exchange to concede to a proposed 12 points peace regulation. And number one point is get all Russian armies out of Ukraine. Then comes the rest. Number one, where it all starts, get all the Russian armies away from Ukraine, okay? Because Putin violated all the international regulations, all agreements reached even in Yalta in 1945, everything Putin has destroyed. And he is destructing now his own power, his own life. But that's beside the point.
Hey, Sasha, one of the things that I found interesting, I know that Steve may find this interesting as well, is there is a part of the world that has not done enough, and a lot of people say that it has not done enough to say where it stands on the war, that being India. But apparently India is now complaining. So maybe they're going to actually join some of their Western allies and everything, because they are saying that Russia can't meet their India arms deliveries due to the Ukraine war. And that's what the Indian Air Force is saying. So I guess they wanted to, because they're military, and I think Steve had even mentioned this as before, it has been growing, but apparently they were getting some of their weapons from Russia, and Russia's too busy using those weapons in the Ukrainian war, so they can't deliver the arms that they had promised to India. So I guess my question to everybody is this going to force India's hand in terms of being not as much of a neutral party? Because right now it seems like be a neutral party.
It's interesting you say that. I'm actually talking with Mr. Suarez Charge at 11 o'clock on an event we're working on with the Indian ambassador coming here in a few months. And I tell you, this is the elephant in the room, Mark. I mean, I don't know what, and Sasha, I know where you stand on this probably, but look, the bottom line is this. I think India, and I'm going to have to ask Chowdhury the tough question today, they're going to have to make a tough decision. I mean, it's not a tough decision, actually. I mean, they got to stand up for what is right. I mean, people are now saying, I'm getting calls from local press corps as the longest serving Indian American asking me, why is India not saying anything? When people are being murdered and slaughtered in Ukraine, you can't be silent just because you're buying oil. So I think that the longer this thing draws out, to be honest with you, I don't know. People are asking a lot of questions.
Steve, with all due respect, you should probably know better than anybody else that Indians, by nature, they are traders. They are going to do anything to trade and get some positive financial outcome of the trade. So the trading with the war criminal, Putin, who is Putin, and make some money by buying at distressed prices their natural resources, primarily oil and gas. This is a typical Indian policy and behavior. So something has to change that behavior. In fact, if they will recognize that Putin is doomed, he has no future, he is convicted, not convicted, but soon to be convicted criminal, they will understand that, okay, so probably we will make in next few years less money that we are making now by basically buying stolen goods, but we will become a part of the international community. And that has much more meaning than this few dollars that they're making now of Russia. Am I correct, Steve?
I think Sacha, you raise a good point, and I think that it's a matter of I think it's a matter of the United States of America, for Secretary of State, President Biden, need to be talking with India to see how do they sway India to be more pro-U.S. and pro-West in opposing Russia. And I know,
No, Steve, I think it's a two-way street. It's like Biden has to talk to India, India has to talk to U.S. and Western.
that's what I meant. That's what I meant.
It's two-way street.
Yeah. Any other opinions on this matter, folks?
No, I did have another question, and this is actually for everybody here, and maybe Lee or Dan want to jump in. I want to say that Dan served in the military. If I'm wrong, please do correct me and everything. But we have always had a presence in the Pacific and everything. But there is another elephant in the room, that being China, and we've actually alluded to them, and apparently they are threatening consequences. And I did hear what Steve said earlier about a potential third world war and all in that space. But do we need to be worried about these talking points that the Chinese are given over the U.S. warship actions on the South China Sea? Because they are saying that, that they're upset that I guess we're in the South China Sea, and that they might be going to retaliate in some kind of way or another. So if we are watching what's going on as citizens of the world, so what should we be thinking about this sparring over the guided missile destroyer that is apparently floating around in South China Sea, and apparently the Chinese aren't too happy with this?
Mark, this is very simple. U.S. has almost $1 trillion military budget, and to justify that, they have to use it, because if they don't, cut it in half, cut it even 2/3, because you don't need that budget if you are not going to project the power that you are going to be recognized by all over the world as the premier, as the supreme power, unchallenged in any respect. That's where you need a $1 trillion budget. So you got it, use it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of muscle flexing that goes on by both China, the United States, and Russia, and when the Iranians, everyone, in North Korea, right? They're launching this underwater drone nuclear type device. And so the Chinese have been aggressive in trying to claim larger swaths of the China Sea that are in international waters, for which they have no legal claim. They built an artificial island basically out in the middle of nowhere and put a base there. And, Sasha's absolutely right. You need to project your military power. You need to challenge claims that are not legitimate under an international law and do that. I mean, the Russians shot down that drone. It was over international airspace. They violated the law in doing so. We have every right to be there. U.S. uses a variety of strategies and techniques to do surveillance and also to project its military power. Now, one of the things that was discussed in the previous show about U.S. naval power is the Chinese are very limited until they start building more nuclear types of naval craft, because of the long distances that they have to travel to do one thing or the other. U.S. has nuclear powered aircraft carriers and others, and can project power pretty visibly and remarkably in any given area, provided that they've got the presence, right? And so I just see this more of the same posturing. China is going to try to push their advantage at every corner, whether it's economically, militarily, or any other way, right? And so the U.S. does the same thing.
And speaking of posturing, and I was going to get to the United States in this conversation as well. I know that there are several people on here that are not the biggest fans, and I'm not saying that I was even the biggest fan of a person that I'm getting ready to mention and everything, but I think some of you are less fans than even I am. But Vice President Harris is going to go visit an entire continent, well, at least parts of an entire continent. She's going to be heading to Africa, and she's going to be going to Ghana, Tanzania, and Zambia. And she did say she's going to discuss the brutality of slavery at a Cape Coast castle during the week-long Africa visit. But part of the visit is to discuss China's influence on the continent of Africa and also debt distress in Africa. So, sometimes people are like playing the game of where is Carmen Sandiego in the sense of what is Vice President Harris and what is she doing as Vice President. And then sometimes she disappears. Sometimes she does things like this where she appears in everything. So my question is, how much of this is posturing, possibly for a presidential run of her own, and how much of this is actually her resurfacing and actually going to say some words that might actually be of interest to the world community?
Mark, I want to ask you a question. I want to back up a little bit. She's going to Africa.
Yes.
There's an African reporter that comes to the White House, the press conference, who's been ignored for a number of years. What's up with that? You would think they would use him, utilize his questioning. They would go, especially now that she's going to Africa. Why is he so isolated that they're just ghosting this guy?
I don't know enough about the reporter and everything. I'll have to do some research on some of my folks that are in that space of Africa news. My dad was actually one of the founders of a news service called the African News Service that was started once here in Durham. And
you can imagine if it was reversing, like Donald Trump was president and they were ignoring a black reporter from Africa, how that would be portrayed.
Yeah. No, they consider racist. Now, the other thing I have to ask is why is she wasting her time in Africa? She hasn't even been to the southern border yet. I mean,
I think she did go to the southern border.
Kamala for president. Yay. Kamala for president. Yay.
I think she did.
Yeah. Steve, she tried that once. How did it go?
Kamala for president. Yay.
Well, that didn't go that well for her.
Are you kidding me? She hasn't got a snowball's chance in hell of being elected president of the United States, number one. She's even less popular than Joe Biden, if that's possible. She's even less popular than Congress. I mean, seriously, she's less popular than the media. And she's less popular than the slap that what's his face
that Chris Rock did to Will Smith.
Will Smith.
Exactly. Yeah,
But
she's less popular than
there
that.
were people that were popular in some sense, and then they got thrust into politics and all in that space. Come back to the other part of the world and
She's
everything.
less
I don't
popular
know
than a school bus. I'm seriously.
Sasha, wasn't there a time, and correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there a time that before he became a war hero, and because he is definitely leading a valiant war there in Ukraine, but I don't know that Zelensky was always popular and everything. By the way, he did say that victory is going to be gained this year, which I know a lot of folks will be glad to hear because we're in our second year, if there are no delays in cooperation. So he actually called on the EU to give more jets and missiles or expect a longer war. So he's saying that the EU will cooperate and not give delays in their cooperation. The war can end in the year 2023, which would be a wonderful thing for the world and all in that space. But he did say if they don't give some more of these jets and missiles, that it could be a longer war. Who knows, maybe a 5, 10, 15-year war. Some of those wars that have lasted that long. I mean, shucks, how long have we been in Afghanistan? For like 20 plus years or something like that. And hopefully we won't be doing that in Ukraine. But my question to you, Sasha, is, was Zelensky always popular, or did he become popular because of what he was thrust into and everything? And secondly, do you agree with his assessment that if the EU cooperates, we can expect a shorter war and all, and it can end this year? Of course, that wouldn't be good for your show ratings, because then we'd have to stop that Ukraine show that we're going to be doing later on this morning.
Thank you, Mark. Number one, popularity of Zelensky. Of course, before he became a president, he could not be popular as a president because he was not one. But he was extremely popular as the actor and producer of two shows that were running for years. He was number one, basically, so to speak, showman in a good and positive meaning of this word. Not because Trump is also showman, but it's something different. So he was very, very popular and very professional actor in Ukraine, and his show was translated and shown in many, many different countries. Actually, he was very popular as an actor. He was very popular in Russia, and millions and millions of people were watching these shows because they were in Russian language, by the way. Now, and Russian language, by the way, it's a mother tongue of Zelensky. Of course, now he communicates in Ukrainian very well, but his mother tongue is Russian, don't forget that, because he was born in eastern part of Ukraine, where Russian language was very popular, probably even more so than Ukrainian. Now, to your second question. That's a very interesting question. Here's what's happening. Ukraine has one shot at really getting away Russian forces out of Ukraine, but it's only one shot. If it's not going to work, nothing will work, and it was the end of Ukrainian existence. In order to do that successfully, it needs everything in its power and possession, including all the Western weapons and everything else. And it is as well in the Western interests, because if it's not going to happen, let's see, I'll tell you, my take is that unless Ukraine will not get all the weapons and ammunition it needs, it will not start its offensive. It's not going to be a sort of a way for the West to deal with Russia, disable it for years to come, using just Ukrainian blood and just saying, oh, okay, we don't need to fight, we have Ukraine, okay, we'll give them another few kopecks, rubles, and let them fight. So we will print more money, it doesn't matter. It's not going to happen. Unless Ukraine will have 100% commitment, weapons, ammunition from the West, United States including, Ukraine will not start its offensive. It will continue to defend, but it's not going to go into offensive, which bodes very badly for the West, because Putin wants a long war. The only way for Putin to exist is to fight the war, because when it's a war, he can exercise absolute powers over his own population. Nobody can challenge him, and he can stay in power for the next 10, 15 years easily. Now, how West can benefit from it? So Putin is fighting the war. He's getting closer to China. They're mounting their influence in that Asian region of the world. And what U.S. can do about that in this scenario? Very
Hey guys, I've got to run. I'll see you.
Before you run, I know you got to
run.
run, Steve. Before you run, I did have one other question for you and everything. And it does come back to India, because apparently, and I was not aware of this, but I was looking at some of the news from some of our other news outlets, and apparently protests are erupting across the U.S. amid the internet shutdown in India and the demand for their activists that's over there as well. And apparently one of those activists was getting arms training. But I was wondering if you knew anything about that, or if you can comment on anything about that.
Well, I'll talk to Mr.
News stories
I'll talk to Mr. Chatterjee about that 11, but I got to go. I got to get on the call. I don't know anything about it.
Okay, take care.
I'll find out. I'll talk to him about it.
Mark, there's another article that I saw in Newsweek. I put the headline up in the chat that Ted Cruz slams Biden administration for funding both sides of the Ukraine war. Is that something, Sasha, that you're aware of? Is Ted Cruz off?
Not at all. How does it work?
It was the article's dealing, I guess, with sanctions on Iran, in terms of Iran being a big exporter of weapons, and we're loosening those controls so Russia can import those weapons. That's my understanding. But this is coming from Ted Cruz. There's a News of the Week article.
You know that Russians have an army of useful idiots in the West, including the United States. So they are paying a lot of money to publish their narrative in different publications. Sometimes it goes even to Wall Street Journal. Newsweek is probably one of them. So I wouldn't take it seriously at all.
Hey,
No,
speaking of
before we go on, you know, I think Lee has a point, and you do too, Sasha. But for whatever reason, the Biden administration is doing everything it can to prop up this Iranian government and all the stuff that they're doing. Why is he facilitating the transfer of arms from Iran to Russia or anyone else?
How does he do it, though?
There should be sanctions. Well, there should be sanctions attached to that. If he's relaxing those sanctions to permit the transfer, then that's wrong. I mean,
but Dan, isn't part of what's going on, and this has been going on around the world and around for decades and everything, but isn't part of it that the United States looks at its strategic needs, whatever those strategic needs are, and they oftentimes do things that might be counter against what the world may want and everything. Because I do know that there have been cases from both Democrats and Republicans where we have propped up what amounts to dictators because we saw them as strategic allies. Case in point, Noriega. Case in point, the Philippines. Case in point, even the Shah in Iran and everything. And those are just some 3 examples that come to my mind automatically. And like I said, this is not a Republican or a Democratic issue because I think that they oftentimes will look at the strategic reason for the alliance, and sometimes we will have some strange bedfellows and all in that space. So that's what I'm thinking is going on. But am I not wrong in thinking that? Lee, you've been involved in politics. Am I not wrong in thinking that we sometimes have some strange bedfellows because of the ways that we are looking at it as a wider global issue and a global situation, that we're trying to find allies that are strategic allies?
I agree with you, but some of that's theater. A lot of stuff is going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of, good and bad.
Well, I can tell you what went behind the scenes and what was behind the Iranian deal during the Obama administration. It had to do with their apprehension of Osama bin Laden. They got some help from the Iranians in capturing him, but there's some double dealing going on. And there was a lot of money paid by the Biden administration to the Iranians over hushing all that up. And so I don't understand all the interplay and why, but the Democrats have a different agenda than the Republicans do on this issue because of things that were done behind the scenes by that administration and the security agencies, the CIA mostly. And it's interesting that most all the SEAL Team 6 members that participated in the apprehension of bin Laden are now dead.
What are the odds of that happening, Dan?
Yeah, no, hardly any, especially with trained trained operators. They're all dead, so they're not able to talk about what really happened. And there's some question whether that was bin Laden at all that they were able to apprehend, and that the Iranians actually did a double deal and protected the actual bin Laden, and that I know this is all just talk. I don't know the veracity of it, but it might explain a lot of strange behavior by the Democrats.
Like I said, there's strange behavior by both sides.
I disagree. There is no strange behavior. The problem is that
that's coming from a Ukrainian Canadian.
No, hold on. You are talking about small potatoes, or some lifted some sanctions, or so on. The main thing is that now
there are billions of dollars were provided in bribes to the Iranians. Okay.
In cash form, Dan, right?
Yeah, in cash form.
Maybe
right,
even
yeah.
trillions, and there.
There was
Huge
big
trains with cash are moving around the borders here and there. No, the major thing here is that with the help of Russians who are getting desperate, Iran indeed very quickly can assemble the nuclear weapons. Maybe not very sophisticated. It's not going to be probably a hydrogen bomb, but it could be some quite powerful, say similar to one that was dropped to Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945. It's powerful enough, and they have means to delivery at least to Israel. And it's a Iranian program is destruction of the state of Israel. And neither Israel, nor United States, or all civilized world can afford to that to happen. So let's assume that it's not going to happen. So how it's not going to happen is either through diplomacy to dissuade Iran from from assembling these nuclear devices, maybe talk to Russia, but both things are in this environment are impossible.
Israel is perfectly capable of taking care of business with Iran.
Yeah,
I mean, if they wanted to, they could go and blow the hell out of them and destroy their government.
well, it's a last
In the way from that happening is the United States and Russia, basically, and now China, right?
Well, don't they have? Because you heard me earlier mention something that was going on locally here and everything, but apparently that can also go on in the world community as well. Because apparently you talked about Israel. Sometimes your internal politics can be an issue there as well. Because apparently the attorney general there in Israel says that Netanyahu is breaking the law and is in violation of the conflict of interest, which would be the same thing that we're dealing with here in Durham, conflict of interest deals and all of that. But they've also passed a law shielding him from being removed as prime minister. So that is some of the things. And there is also saying that he may have acted illegally by getting involved in the judicial overhaul. So that was on the other.
So let me get this right, Mark. You don't like Netanyahu, right?
Don't know enough about the man. I'm just saying that I'm not a big fan of conflict of interest deals on anybody.
I think you're, but here, let me get it right. You're actually pro-Palestinian in the conflict, right? You're pro-freedom, those freedom fighters, right? You're all in favor of that because you don't think they're terrorists. You think they're freedom fighters, right?
I think that Israel. I was having this conversation with somebody that is very dear to me. Who that person is none of y'all's business and everything. But I do think that Israel might have even been created on the acts of terrorism and things along those lines. Y'all can disagree.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah.
So who created those acts of terrorism?
I mean, you're going into a country, it's kind of like what we did with the Indians. You're going into a country where there are already people that existed and you are forcibly making that country your country and everything along those lines. So if you're telling me that that's
this
not
land is my land, this land is your land, from California to the New York Highland. I get it, right? So it's like our aggression on the Native Americans when we came here and settled the United States, right?
There was some aggressions against the Native Americans. There's no doubt about that.
And there was some aggression back. And so it's sort of like but so you're telling me that Israel is an illegitimate, in your mind.
I'm not saying they're illegitimate. They definitely have a right to be a state. They've been a state for decades now, and all in that space, I do think that there is space for a.
And they fought several wars over this,
y'all
right?
say that the Palestinian state needs to be coming from Jordan and everything existing Arab countries, and I hear that from Sasha and others, and I'm not saying that is not a legitimate point of view, but I'm saying that I do not see why there cannot be two states, and I do know that there's some folks that say that will never happen because of certain people having certain agendas, but I would argue that could also be said about certain people within the Israeli population as well. There's a reason that there are the whole conversation.
Who governs the West
Remember
Bank?
one thing, you'll never learn anything by talking, only by listening. So listen once and for all. If you remember how the Israel was created, it was in 1948, the British mandate over all this territory. How the British got their mandate over this territory? It was a result of First World War, where Turkey was defeated power, and therefore England as victorious power, they got the mandate over all this territory. And when British didn't want to rule that after Second World War anymore, so they declare that we are
dividing up.
to forgo our mandate. We're no longer going to rule this territory. So we propose that 2 independent states will be there. One is Israeli for Jews, and one is Palestinian state for Palestinians, or whoever if some Arabs would move there from Egypt or Jordan, welcome, please do build your state, and no problem with there. So Israeli did fulfill their prophecies. They built the state. And by the way, well over 10% of the population of Israel are Arabs, Palestinians, how you want to call them, doesn't matter. But they are Israeli citizens. They are working, they're part of society. They have their representatives in Parliament of Israel, which is a Knesset, and they have representation. So what the Palestinians did instead, they were dreaming of take Israel out to sea. Israel has no right to exist. We're going to take all, not just our part of the British mandate, but all this territory, including Israel. So they fought.
Sasha, I hear what you're saying, but I'm saying, well, you're backing the 2-state solution, which is basically what a lot of people have said is what they want and everything, because that's what the original plan, and that is what you are saying is the 2-state solution. And 2, I'm only saying, and I've heard this from people that have lived there. I've not had the privilege of going to the Holy Land. Hope to do that at some point or another. And all in that life. So I've not had that privilege of going there, but I do know that there are radicals on both sides. That's all I'm saying is there are radicals
Mark,
and supreme radicals.
I'm sorry, I have to cut you right here.
Well, you can cut me, but you can disagree.
No, you have
but there are radicals on both sides.
Have paid terrorists who are paid
there
by
are terrorists
Iran.
On both sides.
No. Absolutely no. There are no Israeli terrorists.
But there are terrorists on both sides.
No. What they're doing is they are inflicting damages on the Palestinian terrorists, so they will not be able to create a new terrorist acts on the Israeli territories. If they want to do it elsewhere, welcome, do it elsewhere, but not in Israel. It's not going to happen. If you remember, maybe you saw the movie Munich. About the
movie Munich. I was around when the Israeli attack happened.
Okay, so the
and there are definitely egregious terrorists that are in the country. There have been egregious terrorists that have been active throughout the world and everything. But there are terrorists that are from the right as well.
Anyways, they were all killed, as you know. So these terrorists today who are destroying Israeli lives and attacking innocent people, what's the difference between these terrorists and 1972? What is there a difference?
Well, like I said there are terrorists and there are severe terrorists that are there, that are part of.
Wait a moment. You're saying
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that there are terrorists.
Are you saying that there are some terrorists, but in fact, they're freedom fighters? So how these people who are destroying innocent Israeli civilians, how are they freedom fighters? How you qualify them?
I mean, that's like the same argument that people gave about the ANC, and that was the argument that people gave in South Africa. But at the end of the day, the ANC won the war, and they did have some success there and everything. Now, they're a fully democratic country in South Africa. I would not say that it is. There still has some work to be done, and I think that there is work to be done in a variety of countries, including those that are our major allies. Y'all are giving Israel a free pass on everything that they do, and I'm not going to give a free pass.
Clear. So what you're saying, you're justifying the terrorist acts.
I'm not justifying terrorist attacks at all.
Really?
I'm not justifying.
No, but you're saying that if
I'm saying that there are. What I'm saying is that there is a
evolve into just.
I'm not going to buy the idea that there are only terrorists on one side. That is not. Nobody would think that.
Mark, come on.
Well, like you said, you think that I'm intelligent. I think you're fairly intelligent too. And to think that there are only terrorists on one side is not. That's preposterous to think.
Okay, so it makes you feel better that there are Israeli terrorists. Can you show us who they are? Maybe you know their names. Maybe you know where they're. What kind of terrorist acts?
I mean, there are some people that would argue that Netanyahu, as well as some of the other people that are in the government, are some of their terrorists. Just like there are some people that would argue that there are terrorists. I mean, Dan is not a big fan of AOC, so he might think that AOC is a terrorist.
Okay, Mark, it's the same thing as to see that the Earth is flat. and
No, I
extending
don't think the Earth is
three
flat, and
L's.
don't even go with that argument. I'm just saying that to think that there are is a country that is beyond reproach, which is basically what you're saying about Israel, that they're beyond reproach. And I'm
Mark,
not going to say that they're not beyond reproach.
Mark, I think you're being a little naive. Tomorrow, if the Palestinians would lay down their arms, there would be peace in the Middle East. If tomorrow Israel would lay down their arms, there'd be no Israel tomorrow. That's the difference.
Wait, hold on a second. You're saying that if the Palestinians laid down their arms, that there would be peace automatically, and I'm saying that there's a lot of
Automatically, yes, yes.
and I
The
don't
other way
necessarily
around,
agree
there'd
with
be
that.
no Israel.
I don't necessarily agree with that. It depends on how it is governed and how it is put.
You will
down there.
not see
that's
the
whole thing
Israeli
around
government
things being there.
overrunning the Gaza and the West Bank and destroying homes and murdering people and butchering and raping the women. You wouldn't see that. The other way
Lee,
around, you'd see it in a second.
Lee, for that to happen, the Iran and other powers have to stop supplying money to Palestinians because they're doing that only for money. If there would be no money, nobody would do any terrorist attacks. Mark, you agree
The
with that?
same thing can be said about America. If America doesn't give money
No,
to
no,
Israel,
no.
does
Stop
Israel
about
continue-
America
does Israel
or
continue to
Mars
exist?
or Jupiter. Just tell me, Palestinians, if money wouldn't flow there, do you think they would commit terrorist attacks on Israeli territory?
Well, first off, y'all are making a big assumption. One, what my dad's lady friend is Jewish, so I know what I'm talking about in the sense of Israel and the rights of Israel and things along those lines. And even she has made the argument that it is very much some forces in the Israeli government that are very much in that space of being terrorists in their own sense and everything. I mean, that's the whole conversation about Zionism versus non-Zionism and all along those lines. And y'all are being very much pro-Zionist. And if you study the words about Zionism, that is kind of like very much of a lot of people would consider that to be a terrorism way of Israel and all in that space. Y'all don't have to agree with me.
How so, Mark? How so? Anyone can move to Israel. Israel, the country, is made up of all types of religions and nationalities and races. It's not strictly a Jewish state.
It's not a strictly Jewish state, but there
I
are
should point it out before that you have non-Jews or whatever in Knesset and the Supreme Court
that have
and the schools.
that have had conflicts with. There are parts of that conservative part of Israeli politics and everything. It's almost like I'm surprised that as much as he hates Trump, that he loves Netanyahu, meaning such and everything, because in some ways they have some very similar standpoints in the way that they want to run their government.
I never said that I love Netanyahu. Never said so. Don't put your words in my mouth, please.
Well, don't put your words in my mouth when you say that I automatically said all terrorists are freedom fighters. I just said that there are times that a terrorist can be a freedom fighter, and I didn't say necessarily it was always the case in Israel. So you were putting words in my mouth. So therefore, tit for tat.
No, what Stassi was saying before, we can give you many links and articles and examples of terrorists coming from one side, but you can't give me any coming from the other side, other than maybe one that happened to have their own a number of years ago with Baruch Goldstein.
I'm saying that if I don't have them in front of me, but I'm saying that if I come back
in that particular case,
I can give you examples of things that were terrorists that were done from the other side. So, like I said,
and even that particular case, which was horrible, was one individual. It wasn't state sponsored.
And I'm saying that I can give you some examples of state sponsored. I just don't have them in front of me at the moment. But I'm saying that if y'all want,
you have homework over the weekend, Mark.
Wait a second. Let me clarify this because, Mark, anytime Israel retaliates against Hamas or anything like that, then you'll probably count that as terrorism.
No. Mark's going to give us examples where Israelis blew up Palestinian pizza shops, school buses, kindergartens, and butchered families in the middle of the night. I'm sure you can find lots of examples like that, Mark. Right?
You said
I challenge you to find any
retaliation, but I mean, it's a retaliation against one person that is doing a very much of that kind of sacrificial terrorist act. And I did hear that snide remark that you gave last week, Dan, about strapping on a bomb. And no, I do like living, so I'm not going to strap on a bomb and all that. But I did catch the snide remark a couple of days ago and all in that space. But
how many Israelis are doing that, Mark?
That is some very interesting folks that choose to do that. And then if you turn around and you bomb an entire school,
Mark, the reason they do that is because they get paid. Their families get paid for this act of martyr that these people do.
These homicide bombers.
It's either
Yeah,
the
there
Saudis
are extremes on all religions.
the
I've said that before. There are
Iranians that
extremes
do
on
that.
all
Well,
religions,
actually, I don't
and
know of
they are
any. I don't know of
extremists from
any
that religious standpoint.
I don't know of any Israeli bombers. Persons that strap crap on them and go blow themselves. It doesn't happen the other way
You don't have to be an
around.
extremist in just that sense. I mean, the martyrdom is one way of folks doing stuff, and that is their choice and what their religious teaching is. But that is a very extreme aspect of Islam. Islam is not necessarily all that.
See,
And
it's
as
not
you know,
really
Islam
part
is
of
also
Islam.
a very divided religion, just like Christianity is. So
It's not part of Islam, really. It's counter to Islam. It's because these terrorists
those
take
are
advantage of these
those
poor
are
people.
extremists, and I agree with you that there.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that there are extremists on both sides. Y'all can choose to disagree, and I will try to bring some specific cases and everything. But y'all can choose to disagree. But I'm saying that there are extremists on both sides. You can also get into the whole conversation around multinationals and global politics, which I know Dan loves as well, because there are some people that think that Israel has too much of an influence in some of that as well. The whole deep state. Some people think that Israel is too deeply buried in the deep state. So that's a whole other conversation as to whether that's true or not.
What's it mean?
I think Israel was behind Epstein. I think the Mossad
So that would
was
be a
behind
case of deep
Epstein.
state.
Yeah. So, I mean, but well, and certainly there's an influence in the media in the United States, not Israeli, but strong Jewish influence in the media in the United States.
Dan, how about the New York Times? They're not so pro-Israel. They're very.
I don't know. It's kind of interesting that you have this strong coalition of Jewish voice in the United States, which is, I'm not saying it's bad, I'm not saying it's good, but they take some of the oddest positions.
I mean, some people would say that they take positions on Hollywood and everything. So definitely they
really
pay attention to Hollywood. Sometimes they pay attention to interesting things. I know we got to get ready to go over to Sasha's show as well, but I mean, some people are paying attention to what the Royals are doing, and some people could care less. Because I mean, one of the other stories that I was going to get to was a lot of folks were glad that one of the current folks, Prince Andrews, is apparently taking stands on various issues, and some people wish that our own politicians would take greater stands, whether we agree with the stands or not, because they are saying that he is not afraid to take a stand, and apparently he's taking a stand on everything from the Ukrainian war, which he is definitely pro-Ukraine, and I agree with him on that. But he's also taken a stand on LGBTQIA rights, because apparently he was visiting a queer-friendly restaurant there in Poland, and apparently Poland still has some repressive rules around those rights.
Who cares? Prince Andrew already dishonored himself, and he's irrelevant.
I just want to interrupt for a second. Mark, the show's almost over. Nick's trying to get in, and unlike the three little pigs wouldn't let the guy in. I think we should let him in.
We'll let Nick in. I did not see Nick there.
Mark, you have to let me in. I'm on the road. I'm in Seville, Spain. See, that's Seville.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Not
Congratulations.
But just one comment, which no one brought up. I know Sasha's got to go. Did you know when Silicon Valley Bank failed, 2 weeks before it failed, the CEO of Silicon Valley Bank pulled out and sold $38 million worth of shares of Silicon Valley stock?
Gee,
it looked like he did it legally, because there's this form you could fill out called a 10b-1-5. Well, I'm not a securities attorney, so I'm not that familiar with it, that shows systematic liquidation. But think, McFly, did he have inside information? And what do you guys think of him becoming a multi-decamillionaire? Why everybody else goes down the toilet?
Well, apparently that was the theme of today's show, in addition to folks jumping on me and everything. But one of the themes was we start off with inside information, possibly being an interest in the city that I'm in, Durham, inside information on Netanyahu, and inside information on now this person in the bank. So apparently there's a lot of folks getting inside information, and that inside information is giving them a lot of money. But the question becomes, how ethical is some of this?
They've been acting on inside information for
Mark,
decades.
do they really even care about ethics? He cashes in for $40 million, and everybody says he's unethical. He goes, thanks, I'll see you later. I'm buying my house in Florida on the beach. And
Yeah.
capitalism is great, by the way. It's just, but in the meantime, all these other people that invested in it got nothing. And some of them are employees. Part of it is that one of the people that work at our office, his daughter was a former manager at Silicon Valley Bank before it crashed. Right before it crashed, she lost everything. Okay.
And the government's not making the whole? Or are you saying they're
No,
investors,
nothing.
not depositors?
You understand, Lee, the way the law works, she gets nothing. She invested in SVC stock in her 401k. She will get zero. In the meantime, the CEO is going to float away with $38 million or maybe more. Float away with $38
Nick, should there be clawbacks on that?
Well, may not. Okay. In other words, he might get away with it. It's just because the way the law is structured. The law sometimes is not 100% fair. As somebody told me, it's a system of resolution, not justice. So he might get away with his $40 million nice home and boat in Florida,
Nice payday,
beautiful
yeah.
retirement, while she's
not.
going to work the rest of her life if she's lucky.
Well, she's going to be out of it no matter whether they claw back or not, right?
They what?
So she would be out no matter whether they claw back his.
Yeah, I'm afraid
gains or not.
I'm afraid she's out no matter what. But you have to imagine, talk about ethics, Dan, the poor shareholders that he dumped his stock on that became worthless within 2 weeks.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he
No,
doesn't-
it's
And he doesn't give a rat's rear.
if
I
he
mean,
had advanced knowledge, it's fraud.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. Hopefully it'll be sued into oblivion. But when I heard about it, my office was telling me about it a couple of weeks ago. And I was going, you cannot be serious. But anyway, we got to go to another show. So, Mark, you got to do the next show.
Already
Y'all have a
on
good
it.
weekend.
Already
Me
on
too.
it, but yes,
Me
we
too.
got to
Good
end
show,
this show
guys.
and everything. But definitely
Take care,
keep
Nick.
the conversation going while I
Thank you.
do these other guests and everything.
Yeah, we had fun picking on you today, Mark.
Yeah,
Thank
you
you.
were having too much fun, but that's all right. I like.
Mark, you
I
should have
think-
Alan Dershowitz on the show. You should have Alan
What'd you
Dershowitz on the
say?
show. Alan Dershowitz on the show. It'd be very interesting. He's a lawyer also, obviously.
I know who he is. He used to
Yeah.
teach at Harvard. We'll see if we can get a hold of him. All right.
There you go.
Yeah, you're
Thanks.
free? Okay. We'll see you.
Yep. Hold on one second
On the-
as I get his show started. Then we'll get the other
Three.
one ended. Yep, there we go. I had to get Tasha started. I will go ahead and end this one as well. But yeah, I like having lovely conversation with you and James. But yeah, you had to my own. But that's always fun having conversation with y'all. And I'll see y'all on Monday and all in that space. But it's
Take
been
care,
good.
Dan.
We'll
Take care,
talk
Mark.
y'all later.
Thank you. God bless.